Welcome to the Real Estate Niche Show, a show that focuses on top real estate professionals who specialize in different niches of real estate. My name is Ben Kogut. Join me as we dive deep into the professional and personal lives of the experts of the real estate industry. Welcome to the Real Estate Niche Show. I'm your host, Ben Kogut. Today, I have a very high energy guest. Ruben Greth is here with us today. Ruben is a popular podcast about raising money for multifamily syndication called The Capital Raiser Show, where he learns from the best multifamily syndicators in the country. I'll add that he also got to interview me back in September of 2019. We may talk about that here in a second. He recently raised $1 million through co-sponsoring for multifamily projects in Arizona. Originally, he got his start by doing social media videos for a local apartment investor in Phoenix and successfully raised $625,000 for deals during that post-crash buying frenzy. Ruben, it is really wonderful to have you on the show. Thank you so much for being here. Is there anything else you want to add?
Dude, I'm super pumped up to be here, dude. We need to be hanging out way more, dude. I miss you. Love your energy too. You were a hell of a lot of fun on my show, episode number 11. I don't remember when we recorded that, but since then I've done quite a bit of shows and done a lot of learning and received quite a bit of contradictory information from attorneys about how to do funds. So we're going to talk about fund creation and the funds that we have going and what I used to know about raising capital in the beginning. And hopefully we'll kind of dive into some of the progression and things that I've learned along the way. And that bio that you read is getting outdated super fast. We're in the middle of a 506C, $2.5 million capital raise for our own build to rent project. That's going well. We should have that completed, and I'll take credit for those $2.5 million as well. So now that number is closer to 4 million and we're steadily climbing. Man, it's an honor to be here, dude. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, brother. It's I couldn't think of anybody better than Ruben Greth. I mean, your podcast really was one of the first things that inspired me. You and Adam Carswell got me going on the podcast stream. I've been on over 20, and I just really wanted to start my own, and I really wanted to make it nichey, and so I just called it the Real Estate Niche Show to interview people like yourself. And so I really am honored that you're here. And I echo what you had to say. I look forward to connecting with you in person, hopefully here pretty soon.
Yeah, right. So we don't have a selfie or anything. Let's do it, man. Where do you want to start?
Let's start with, I know that you did a pretty major transition. From you had the podcast going. Yeah, let's talk about that and what you've learned along the way and other wisdom that you might want to be able to share.
All right, man, let's go through it kind of quickly. I know we only got 30 minutes, but let's say that I started raising on social media, on YouTube, actually, with a fourplex investor that came into town back in 2009. I met him at a meetup. He had recently gone bankrupt in San Diego by investing in spec homes and showed up on the scene and was taking down a fourplex like every other week. It seemed like he was just blazing through it. I couldn't figure out how he was doing because I knew that he had a bankruptcy and that he couldn't get financing. So I'm like, hey, dude, can I just follow you around and kind of be like the little puppy dog and to shoot videos of you? And, we can talk about how you raised money, like what you thought about these projects, how you acquired them, where you're going to get the capital from. And we started sharing these videos. In a period of about 9 to 12 months, we raised $600,000 for small multis, particularly from joint venture partners, right? So they would become owners of our LLC and we would join the whole thing as a group and people would have ongoing duties. So it was all legal. I had studied a little bit about capital raising. And then because we were taking down so many of these, we were keeping some, we were flipping some. I needed some money, so I flipped the majority of my fourplexes, but there was a fire sale going on in Phoenix. And if I had kept those units that we bought at under 20,000 a piece, I would be super millionaire status right now. But I flipped them and, I learned my lesson, keep those things forever. I interviewed a gentleman named Sam Freshman, who was one of the original syndicators that wrote a book called The Principles of Syndication. Wow, probably in the 1970s. And his very first syndication was a high-rise building in Los Angeles. And he told me like one lesson from that show that I learned. He's like, most investors that have gone through 4 cycles, they look back at their entire history of raising capital and owning properties. And they say, I learned these 2 lessons. I sold too soon and I didn't buy enough. And that really kind of stuck with me because most people in today's kind of multifamily syndication or commercial real estate syndication business, they're buying and selling these properties in 5 to 7 years. So there's a part of me that really likes this kind of legacy investing, like keep as much as possible forever. But I also understand that some people are getting ready to retire and need to get their money back very quickly and get that velocity of capital working as fast as possible so they can, you know, even if they have to reinvest it, hey, if they're getting a faster return and they can remultiply it by investing with other syndicators and other sponsors, or maybe even with the same sponsor, that makes sense for them. But so I ended up breaking up with this particular partner and all I knew was fourplexes. So I left the country for a little while because I couldn't handle being in corporate America, and eventually worked my way back into the United States and developed this plan to buy a bunch of fourplexes. I wanted to buy one and then double my portfolio every 2 years or so until I had a portfolio of 32 fourplexes or 128 units. And I figured if I just paid these suckers down, I'd be like financially free for the rest of my life. And I showed this methodical plan to some investor at a local ASREA, you know, an Arizona Real Estate Investor Association kind of meeting. And they're like, 128 units. Yeah, I could see how that would satisfy your needs. Why don't you just go buy them right now? And I hadn't bought my first fourplex yet, you know, since coming back from Mexico. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, I don't know how to buy 128 units. How's that even possible? And they introduced me to this thing called syndication. So I got all excited about syndication. I'm like, there's no way that this can be legal, right? How do you take down 128s if you're just a Joe from the street? And then I realized very quickly that there's a lot of people that are in this business model with specific skill sets, and they unite their skill sets and then work together as a team where there's like an underwriter, an acquisitions guy, somebody with a little bit of cash, maybe like a key principal or loan guarantor and other people and some people that focus on marketing or capital raising. They all come together and then they put their resources together and they take down these huge properties. And I was like, wow, this is just amazing. So I was going to hire a guru to teach me this whole multifamily business when I started deciding to interview syndicators. And I came across these local ones named Bakerson. And I was like, who do I need to have on my team? I'm trying to figure out this business. I'm about to drop some money on a guru. You know, give me some input before I do this. And they're like, well, what do you care for? I'm like, well, I used to raise capital for small multis. I have some social media background, and I want to know how I see this as a great vehicle for creating generational wealth. And it's got a lot of scalability that I can't do if I'm buying fourplexes or houses by myself. And they said, wait a second, did you say that you raised money on YouTube? We need somebody like that. So they brought me on board. And then over a period of about a year, I realized that they were really good at acquisitions and really sucked pretty bad at the capital raising side. And this is because they transitioned from the single family space into the multifamily space. And in the single family space, if you have a good enough deal and it's worth like less than $250, you can probably find the money for it. But once you start playing in the big leagues and $5 million projects, you need to have like all of this infrastructure and communications and everything else in order for you to scale. And they just didn't. They didn't understand branding or marketing or social media. They thought that they could just hire somebody to raise capital for them, or, you know, that I would raise all of the money just by myself, you know, off the streets without having any existing track record or database. And it was just really tough. So after launching the show, the Capital Raiser Show, which I launched so that I could learn the exact same thing that they hired me to do, I started realizing that a lot of capital raisers in this business had a lot of infrastructure in place and a lot of communication. Before they raised capital, they nurtured and educated and got people to know, like, and trust them before they presented a deal to them. So Bakerson was doing it a little bit backwards. But from this show, I met a ton of capital raisers and a ton of attorneys and a ton of syndicators. And I was like, well, how do I put these syndicators and capital raisers together and facilitate this and do this legally? There's, you know, due to the SEC, there's all kinds of regulations and structures and things that you're allowed to do, and certain regulations that allow you to raise from people that you know, and some that you're allowed to raise from people that you don't know. And so, so the overwhelming response from the attorneys was, if you want to put these capital raisers and these syndicators together and make some money off of it, the best and most legal way to do it is to start your own fund. So I quit that company to go launch my own fund for a couple of reasons. One, like trying to get them to implement marketing and automations and rebranding. It was like pulling teeth, right? A mom and pop syndicator. They kept on thinking, hey, Ruben, you need to go raise the capital. And, we can talk about how I did. I raised $1 million for that company through co-GPs. But eventually I decided to split off and launch my own fund. And that's where I find myself today. So we have one fund that's doing, it's an SPV, a specific purpose vehicle, that's going to raise for this Prove It project, 98 units out in Louisiana. It's a 506C, which means I'm legally allowed to talk about it on podcasts and advertise for it. And once we build these things out, we have another fund sitting on the side waiting. That's going to be a blind pool fund, which is a harder capital raise than the SPV, which is because it's only for one project and it's specified. We're going to take this other fund and then take a branch of our business and do build to rent. We have like 2 projects coming down the road. And then the other kind of aspect that I'm doing, the other branch of capital raising, is to take our existing database, which is significantly large because my partner's got a big database, and nurture them, educate them on both multifamily value add projects and on build to rent. And over time, get it to the point where we can raise specifically from limited partners. Because right now, one of the things that I'm really like, one of my superpowers is connecting with capital raisers. So capital raiser is great because they can bring in money fast. They have all their people already lined up, already nurtured and educated, and that know, like, and trust levels it's high for them. So if they can convince them that the project is good, their investors, their LPs already believe in them enough so they can move a lot faster. But if you bring a capital raiser into your fund or your business as a co-GP, you're giving up a piece of your business. And it works great for speed, not as much for keeping the whole pie to yourself or for your group. Obviously, you want to focus on hooking up your LPs and giving them a great return, but you want to keep some along the way too, so that you don't starve to death, right? Because this business is expensive with all the marketing and finding deals and partnering. All that stuff costs money. And if you are giving away your acquisition fees and giving away all the pieces of the pie and there's very little left for you, it can be challenging to have enough money to implement more systems that will help you get your own limited partners. That's where I find myself today, man. Hopefully I cruised through that quickly enough.
Oh, I love your story. I'm inspired by it. Yeah, I'd love to know more about those systems that you're talking about. What systems have you put in place?
So I hired the Good Egg Investments ladies. They have a program called the Real Estate Accelerator. They are typically co-GPs and capital raisers for other sponsors. And they talk a lot about automations, about where to find LPs. A lot of it really boils down to, before you do anything, is to define who your investor avatar is. And for them, I'll just use theirs. It's like a lady that lives in San Francisco that goes to yoga, that's got like 3 kids. Her name is Jen. She likes to shop at, certain places. And based off of all of these particular data points, like where, how much money do they make? What's their husband do for a living? You can kind of find where they are, in Facebook groups. And then you can go into like women's groups or like busy professionals. And then you can start planting seeds and you can find your LPs. But you can't do that if you're marketing to doctors and lawyers and business owners and all these people. Number one, you can't boil down and condense a message that resonates with any of them in a way that stands out, right? It's always like, generational wealth and this and that. Well, you can find that anywhere. But when you're describing a message that speaks to somebody about creating generational wealth, and you have a brand that doesn't show buildings and infographics and like hypothetical numbers, like people don't care about that. They'd never invest into a property because they love property that much. They invest in it because there's something that they get from investing in it. Whether that's like retiring on a beach or spending more time with your grandkids or finally being able to retire from your CPA thing. your business, those are the things that they think about, and the emotional reasons to why they invest before they invest. It's not because they love buildings. So you see all these webinars and these websites, they're all buildings, 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 buildings. It makes people want to puke, honestly. They don't care about that stuff. They care about like some kind of a message. So that's the first step. Once you like build a really nice brand that makes you feel good, that makes you want to be friends with them, and that can kind of get you the doorway into talking about financial freedom with them, then you can start educating and nurturing them. And I asked Neil Bawa on my show, I'm like, hey, so what's the best marketing plan to do this? Like, how do we, do you focus on social media? Do you focus on meetups? And he's like, well, that's an irrelevant question because there is no one thing. It's a variety of things. You have to have social proof. You have to have connections. You have to be networking. You have to be meeting people. You have to be presenting. You have to be going on podcasts. You have to be doing all of it. Like when people hear about you from somebody else, and then they also know somebody that knows you, and they've seen you on a show and seen you consistently produce content and constantly getting and receiving emails from you, then that starts to build that know, like, and trust level to the point where you can go from $1 million capital raise to 4 million to 14 million. This is the path that I've seen some of my mentors go on, where it used to be super tough to raise. Their very first raises were like for 400 and they struggled. And now they're raising $14 million a pop. So part of that is defining your avatar and then nurturing and educating them. And this doesn't happen overnight. This is a process that takes 6 months to 3 years, in some cases longer, to get people. So that's why you always want to be talking about your business, what you're doing, and how much success and how many returns. And, like a lot of people talk about the generational wealth kind of principles and the things that they're instilling in their kids, and something inspirational and in some cases spiritual, and, like how it all intertwines together. And they do this over long periods of time to get people to know, like, and trust them. And this is the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. And then, like you always have, like your automated emails, your active campaign where you're tracking people and all of that kind of stuff. If you have like certain pages that you manage or meetups that you manage, all that stuff starts to become your systems. And then, we can talk about systems for other, like even in your property, what are you doing to property manage it? And can you find a platform like a Syndication Pro, which is one of the sponsors that allows you to raise capital right through that platform and accept soft commits. And in some cases, you can find platforms that do distributions of K1s and taxes and all of that stuff. And in a fund, that starts to become important because not all of your investors are going to invest for the same deal at the same time. Some may come in on the first deal, and then some may come in on the second. And how do you divide the profits between those? That sounds like an accounting nightmare to me. So if you have those systems in place that can help you, that kind of goes a long way for your investors and for your own sanity, because you're not like emailing a bunch of people, one by one with their distributions and sending them checks and stuff like that. So systems are really important too.
Love all that, Ruben. Thanks so much for sharing that. And it's like pretty glaringly obvious. I want to talk about your mentality, right? From where you were versus where you are now. Can you maybe chat a little bit about that?
Well, we kind of chatted about it a little bit already, but, I think one of the big things for me was that I used to think and hear that if you found a good enough deal, the money would come. But sure. When, like when I was raising for little deals, like we tried to do a little hotel entitlement deal back in 2007. And then I would raise for, like as a connector, I would get paid a marketing fee for certain companies. And I wouldn't like really own the property. It would just be like for sending referrals their way. I'd get like a little fee. And then, that kind of progressed into, hey, if I raise the capital, then I get a specific portion of the JV. And then as my duties besides the capital started increasing, like me finding deals, locking them up, then I got an even bigger piece. In addition to the capital that I brought, I'd get a bigger portion of the JV, not GP, of the joint venture, because now I was doing more things. And if you look at a sliding scale of like all these different duties, the more duties that you can attain, the greater percentage of the property you're going to get. So I went from like 10% to 25% to like 35% ownership. And then, like in this particular phase, which was during the fire sale of 2009 multifamily crash, or the entire housing economy crash and the loan crash, I basically was mimicking my mentor and doing all the things that he was doing other than micromanaging contractors. And I was acquiring the deals. And then he broke me down one day. He's just like, hey, dude, you're very effective at raising from social media. Like I can raise from my friends and family, but you're raising for people that we don't even know. Why don't you focus? Let's grow this thing. Let's blow this thing up. And so I'm like, okay, like I'll let you handle acquisitions and everything. I guess we don't need two machines doing that same thing. And I really kind of went like bonkers, right? We were going to write a book. We did like a marketing campaign. We were going to do a email drip system and a CD campaign. We were going to go on tour. And I even flew this producer from San Diego that was going to record this mini pilot, because everybody had a show on flipping houses back then. And we wanted to do one on cash flow investing, right? Investing into fourplexes and legacy investing. And then like I had all this money invested in all this marketing, and this particular partner stopped showing up because he was so busy micromanaging all of the contractors. And one of the big lessons from that is, number one, I could have been a little bit cooler and patient with him. And number two, if you are so busy doing stuff yourself instead of delegating stuff out, it's going to cause problems for you. In which case it did for him, to the point where he started fighting with me. And now one of his capital sources took off. But for me, they always talk about real estate is kind of a liquid kind of asset, where if you're not adapting and pivoting and changing and, hanging, like being able to understand what the economy is doing, you can lose track very quickly and fall out. And I've seen a lot of people that have fallen out and or are still stuck in the first asset class. Like they may be flipping houses 20 years later, and they're still basically flipping a house for money, and they have no residual income whatsoever. They have an S quadrant job, essentially, where as soon as they stop working, their income stops, right? So from here, kind of, I was like, well, what do? I have nobody to promote. All of my marketing is never based on me. My marketing is based on somebody else, which is a great avenue. If you're trying to add value to somebody and become a part of their team, by the way, this is a great way to do it. But like I used to have this limited mindset that multifamily investors do not grow on trees. And I was like, well, I'll never find another partner that like specifically likes fourplexes. But what I realized after starting the show is that multifamily investors do grow on trees. Like I interview them every day. They're all over the country, and they want you to contact them. At the end of everybody's podcast, they're giving you their information. Please contact me. And I realized that if I use the same formula that I use to acquire houses or properties, which is, hey, find 100 properties, put an offer in on 10, maybe 3 of them will get close and you'll take down 1. I use the same formula for multifamily investing partners. I figured if I talk to 100 people, I'll probably like and become friends with 10 of them. And of those 10 friends, I'll probably get 3 that are close to doing business with me. And of those, I'll probably get 1 that I do business with, right? So I use this specific philosophy even today. Like when I'm making 100 phone calls, that's pretty easy, by the way. That sounds kind of complicated, but if I'm talking to 100 people from my calendar, and maybe we'll chat on how to do that, how to get 100 people on your calendar very quickly. If I talk to 100 of them every month, I'm probably going to get one of those guys to raise capital for us. And if I do that, that probably just put a bunch of dollars into my pocket, even though like we're giving away a part of my company. But I think LinkedIn for me is one of the greatest, like we try to say, hey, you don't have a specific one marketing tool that's better than any others, because you need to have them all working for you. But like when it comes to leads, for me, LinkedIn has been number one by far and away where people get on my calendar, because I'm adding people every day. They send me a message. Hey, what's up, dude? This is what I do. I see that I've heard your show. Thanks for connecting, man. I'm excited. And they already know me. So that's already a bonus. And then I just basically replied to him, hey, like, I'd love to talk shop about multifamily or capital raising or fund management. I'd love to help you create your own fund, at least talk to you about who you need to have in your circle for you to create your own fund and what kind of stuff you need to know. Let's get on a call. And then boom, my calendar is ridiculously full. And once those people, I get them on the phone. Some of them are just people that I probably won't ever do business with, but some of them eventually turn into partners. And that's the way I am bringing capital raisers into our fund, and we can legally bring them into by giving them a piece of our fund and then having them have their ongoing duty, which is another concept. In the co-GP space, if you're going to partner with somebody, there's kind of a dilemma. Right? Let's say that you have $500,000 of people in your system and you're looking to get your co-GP card, your next level up, right? Or become a GP or a syndicator, or, do one of these more profound kind of ownership plays, right? So you can either go and co-GP, which legally, according to the SEC, you're going to have an ongoing duty, because you can't just give somebody your money and walk away. That's illegal unless you have a broker-dealer's license. But that requires a great deal of negotiation. And typically somebody was only going to want you to raise capital for them once they're kind of in a high pressure situation, their deal's already going. And like, you're not going to have enough time to nurture and educate your friends and family on this deal. And it's just like a time crunch, right? So this is there's a couple of inherent problems doing the co-GP model. The other model is to become your own GP, which is kind of tricky because if you don't have a track record, people aren't going to want to buy anything with you. And then the other model, which we like to do, is, hey, become a part owner of our fund. And the only thing that you'll ever have to do, because our fund invests as an LP into somebody else's deal, is just manage your investors, right? Because as an LP, by definition, you're not allowed to have an ongoing duty in the business. So this is a really cool play. And it does have some inherent problems. If you're going to go launch your own fund, that can cost anywhere from $7,000 to $25,000. But if you just become part owner of someone else's fund, then now you're leveraging their track record. You're not doing it on your own, because the first thing they're going to ask you is like, hey, your fund, how many of these funds have you done before? And if the answer is zero, they may kind of have you can kind of mitigate that by saying, hey, well, this sponsor has done, 17 deals, and that'll help. But in a fund, if you don't have to pay for it and you don't have to have an ongoing duty, this is why I think capital raisers are attracted to our specific business model. I don't see a lot of people doing this, but it is kind of, the whole fund business is gaining a ton of traction right now. So hopefully that kind of helps a little bit kind of describe how the mentality has changed for me.
Totally. Yeah, and I've gotten to know you for the last couple of years, and I'm just like really inspired by that your mentality, your enthusiasm, your ability to educate and share the wisdom that you've learned along the way. And so before we kind of start winding things down, I would love to find out what other nuggets of gold have you been able to pick up from. How many interviews have you done?
I've done like 160 or so. Plus, like, I did a couple of series, one with Bakerson about their entire history. I did a mindset one called Mind Magic. And then I did Raising Money Minutes, which talked about when you're interviewing people, you can talk to them about what they did, but you can't really dive deep into like, how do you get passive investors? How do you build an avatar? How do you rebrand? So we did the series about mindset called the Raising Money Minute, which is really good. I have one that's still kind of in the early phases called the Club de Inversionistas, where we're kind of doing like a Spanglish, we're breaking down philosophies and terminologies of working with international investors, and then nurturing them and educating them, and then even defining and explaining what some terms are. Some terms in Spanish are like syndication. In Spanish would be sindicato, which sounds like a syndicate, which some attorneys use that, but it can mean something totally different if you're just not familiar with it. It can mean like some community organization. It can mean like a mafia organization. And so we're trying to educate people on the terminology. I have one called Tech and Capital that I do with Syndication Pro, and one last one that I do with Kate and Patel. It's called the Raising Money Mentor, where it's all for the most part, mindset and systems for aspiring capital raisers. So I have like 430 pieces of content, and every show that I do, I condense it down to 2 minutes. So if you just want to get a taste of what a show's about, you can listen to the preview. And then if you like it, you can listen to the whole thing.
Love all that. Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about what we could put in the show notes. Like give us some websites here.
Well, you can go and check out my company, Legacy Acquisitions. You can find me. I would say like the best resource would be like go to my LinkedIn or my Clubhouse. Probably LinkedIn would be best because you can find my calendar link on there, and then you can schedule some time. And then I'm happy to talk to anybody at any stage. You know, what's funny is I've talked to people that have raised $100 million more than I have, and they know nothing about funds. And I'm like, hey, dude, this attorney that you're going to talk to is going to be able to put docs together for you, but they're not going to be able to give you any business advice. They're not going to tell you the differences between a segregated deal by deal fund versus a blind pool versus an SPV. They're not going to be able to give you any systems for managing the money that comes through these. Let me kind of direct you and guide you to who you should be talking to if you want to launch a really powerful fund and use your track record to get it going. And they're just like, wow, like I had no idea that you knew way more about funds than I do, even though like I've raised 100 times more than you have. So these kind of conversations are fun, but I talk to people that have never raised a single dollar on a regular basis. I'm happy to help those guys. Just schedule some time on my calendar. So calendly.com/RL Greth. Let's put that in the show notes so they can find me there, or you can find me on Instagram at Capital Raiser, Facebook, LinkedIn, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, and my company is called Legacy Acquisitions, legacyacquisitions.com. And I have a cool website for my show called capitalraisershow.com.
It's all great stuff. Ruben, I really, really am honored and grateful that you took the time to come on the Real Estate Niche Show. And if there's anything I can do to help you with what you're doing out there.
You can come back on my show and explain to me how you raised $380 million, or not even that. That's how much assets you have under management, right? So a portion of that was a capital raise. I know that your story is pretty powerful, and you've been scaling and growing too, man. So come back on the show. We'd love to hear how you raise specifically for commercial real estate that's not typically multifamily. I think people like that kind of stuff for sure.
Correct. Well, I'll definitely look forward to coming back on the Capital Raiser show. And I like to try to keep this one closer to 30 minutes. So we're going to wind it down. Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we shut it down?
Not that I can really talk about too in depth. I mean, I really love to spend some time on mindset and spirituality, but for the most part, I think we got the point across. We did a good job talking about some of the capital raising things that people should be aware of before they get started. So with that, we'll kind of shut it down. It's been a pleasure to be on your show, brother.
I appreciate it. Well, thanks everybody for listening to the Real Estate Niche Show. I would just really be appreciative if you could share this, hit the like button, subscribe, all that good stuff, so that we can get some more wonderful guests like Ruben on our show. And on that note, I will see you guys soon.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Real Estate Niche Show. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest from me or the show, you can follow me on Instagram at Ben Kogut and at The Real Estate Niche Show. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.